little activity here, so we're going to get right underway. Start with the sponsors and then right into the Gemara. Okay. A year of learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Leibush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paul and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael, in memory of Malcolm Mann, and in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avrameir ben Shimon, shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marsha Federbush and family in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, Yisrael Yosef ben Chaim, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edel Bas Yaakov. A month of learning by Josh and Carol Sanborn, in memory of his mother, Chiena Bas Aryeh Leib, and his father, Shmuel Aryeh ben Baruch. Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his mother, Fega Bas Yaakov. Andrea and David Dolney, in memory of her mother, Edel Tzina Bas Shimshon. Friends of Bella Silverstein, Bela Bas Yaakov. A week of learning by Phyllis and Gedalia Reese, in memory of her father, Harav Yosef ben Harav Shimon, Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her father, Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai. Today being the 15th, a day of learning by B. Worden, in memory of her father, Shmuel ben Yosef. May Hashemas have an aliyah, crank Rafir, Velti, Yeshir Hashem Tzliah, and the Chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Gaben Shtiach.
Amen.
I see Zev got back, and I assume the other guys will be shortly. Okay, Kaf Yud Dalet, Amud Aleph is where we're starting. Okay, actually the last word on Kaf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha. Okay, remember they were saying this sage's name is this, and this sage's name is this, and this sage's name is something else. That was what was at the bottom of Kaf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, and now it's just adding to that a little bit. Okay, after it said there that Rabbi Yitzchak ben Tavla, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Chakla, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Allah. And then it just continued on top of Kaf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha Deshma'ata, who Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas Dagadata, again giving us clarification that when Rabbi Yitzchak ben Acha is mentioned in halachic sections, he is the same as Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas, who's mentioned in Agadata sections. The Simanach, he says the Gemara, in your way to remembering it, Shimu na achai v're'ai. The Shimu is supposed to remind you of Shema'ata. Good bless. Okay, and achai v're'ai. Okay, the achai ben acha for the business of the halacha. Therefore, the other would be for Agadata. Right? Amar Rava bar Chana, he says. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmei de Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli. Okay. Now, again, more advice. Echol batzel, v'shev batzel. Okay, he's telling him eat onion and sit in the shade. In other words, a compromise on what you eat, but do so and try to do so in a comfortable place. V'lo tichol avazin v'tarnagolim, and don't get accustomed to eating fancy foods like ducks and chickens, things like that. V'hei libcha rodef alecha. Why? Because the end result will be that your heart will run after these things. In other words, you'll get accustomed to fancier, more costly foods. Namely, how do you adjust this? Pachot mimilchlach umimeshtecha. Okay, reduce the amount of what you eat and what you drink. V'tosif diratcha, but instead apply it to your residence. Okay, in other words, better to put money in to your living surroundings than spend the money on the food. Again, another aspect. Ki ata ula ama. When Ula came, right? What did he say? Again, he made another suggestion. Matla matlin b'ma'arava. Matla here is mashal, an example, a mashal, a parable, is what they would say in the West, in Eretz Yisrael. Da'achil alita tashe ba'alita. One who gets used to eating the fat tail of the animal, okay, what happens to that person? Okay, he will have to eventually hide in the attic. In other words, people that will know that he's well-to-do, or the government knows that he's well-to-do, they will come after him, and he'll have to hide in the attic. The achil kakule, whereas one who eats vegetables, akikale de mata shachiv. Okay, the one who is used to eating a lesser quality or lesser amount or lesser status kinds of meals, this way vegetables, the mata shachiv is able to even live on the garbage heap. Okay, having finished that series of examples of advice and direction in lifestyle, we're going to come back, beginning now to come back to issues dealing particularly with the Seder. Okay, now, this first Mishnah that we have on this page, okay, is going to start us off with a proposal. We know that at the Seder, we start off the first cup of wine with wine, and it's to making Kiddush. Okay? So the Gemara is going to begin a discussion in a moment as to what blessing should take precedence. The blessing of Kiddush for the wine itself, or the blessing for the sanctification of the day. And so the Mishnah starts. Mazgu kosh rishon. They poured him or mixed him the first cup. Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al hayom. According to Beit Shammai, says the Mishnah, you say the blessing on Kiddush Hayom, sanctifying the day, v'achar kach mevarech al hayayin, and afterwards the blessing on the wine. Beit Hillel omrim says the opposite. We're going to see mevarech al hayayin. You say the first part of the Kiddush should include the blessing over the wine, v'achar kach mevarech al hayom, and afterwards bless the day. Gemara. Okay, so what's the question the Gemara is going to try to clarify? Tanu Rabbanan with a Braita. Devarim shebein Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel b'su'udah. Okay, their disagreement, their words really deal with the meal. Okay, with the order of the meal. Remember, Seder, okay, is not just the name we give to the dinner, but it's because everything is conducted in a certain order. Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al hayom, ve'achar kach mevarech al hayayin. According to Beit Shammai, their argument is you say the blessing sanctifying the day. Why? Because the holiday started at night once it was sundown, right? And therefore the day has been established. And then, therefore, that's what's going to cause us to say the blessing for the wine. Ve'achar kach mevarech al hayayin, mipnei shehayom gorem layayin sheyavo ukvar kidesh hayom. Why? Because the day which has started once it's dark, right, means that the holiday has started, and this is what's causing us then to drink the wine. Okay. Va'adayin, and now a second argument, yayin lo ba. But when the day first comes, we don't immediately start with wine. Okay. Beit Hillel argues, excuse me, Omrim mevarech al hayayin. They argue that you say the blessing on the wine first. Ve'achar kach mevarech al hayom. And then afterwards, the kiddush of sanctification of the day. Why? Mipnei shayayin goreim lekiddush. Because it's the wine that is the cause, that's the primary, let's say, component. I'm going to explain it that way, for the means of making the day sanctity. Shetomar, why? Because you'll say, davar acher. That's what causes you to say the day is holy. And Beit Hillel now adds a second reason. What's the davar acher? Right? Beracht hayayin, birkat hayayin tadira, ubirkat hayom ena tadira. That the blessing of wine is more frequent. Blessing of a day is less frequent. And we have a general principle that says, that which is more frequent and that which is less frequent, which is more frequent takes precedence. And so the Gemara at this point tells us, V'hilchata k'divrei Beit Hillel, and the law is like a Beit Hillel. So Gemara asks a very logical question. Why was it necessary for the school of Beit Hillel suddenly to add this additional reason? My devar acher. Okay, v'chi tema, and if you want to say hatam tarte, okay, v'hachachada, namely that there in the argument of Beit Shammai they gave two reasons, and here they're only giving one in Beit Hillel. Hachanami tarte ninhu. Here too, they really have two reasons. Because tadir v'sheino tadir kodem. Because they bring this additional reason, which is a general principle. It doesn't just apply to our case. Okay? And therefore, v'halacha k'divrei Beit Hillel. And thus, the Gemara concludes that the law is like the Beit Hillel. Pshita, says the Gemara now. Doesn't that seem obvious? Daha nafik batko. Why? Because wasn't there a baskol, a divine voice that said, in general, that in a market between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the law is generally according to Beit Hillel, right? Ibayat Ema, to answer that statement, I'll suggest the following, says the Gemara. I might say, Kodem Batko. Maybe this was before the divine voice came out and specifically said the halacha in general is according to Beis Hillel. V'bayat ema, or if you want, I would say the following: La'achar batko. It was after the divine voice stated V'Rabbi Yoshuahi. Okay, and it follows the view in opposition, we're going to say, to the position of Rabbi Yehoshua. Why? The Amar, because it was Rabbi Yehoshua who said, Ein mashgichin bebatko, that we don't pay any attention to basko. Okay? So that completes that particular Mishnah and its Gemara. Our second Mishnah on this Amud, okay, is now going to continue with, again, following what went on in the Seder meal. Now you remember, I'm sure, that our practice is to recite, I would say, a good part of the Haggadah initially. Okay, we do Kiddush, we do Magid. Okay, that Magid contains a lot of material in it, and proceed all the way up to the first parts of the Hallel. Then we break for the meal, and then we continue after the meal with the rest of Hallel and so on. That was not the practice at the time of Chazal. Okay? They had a different, let's call it for the moment, format. Okay?
Can we go back to that way?
What?
Can we go back to that way?
Not what you want to eat first. Huh? I told you the other day you could serve dessert first, Steve.
Yeah, right.
You tell that to your wife. Okay? But we're going to see here, and I had initially a problem with this particular Mishnah and Gemara, and I will explain it to try to alleviate the problem I had, okay? Because remember, we already said that in a previous Gemara that in preparation for the Seder, one could serve appetizers. And among those appetizers were vegetables. So, for example, they could serve vegetable dip, all right? That would not be strange, but that's going to lead us to the fact that perhaps this was done initially as an appetizer because they ate their meal first. It was done the same way, that they served the vegetables with a dip. Now, we're used to the idea of vegetables and a dip as well. However, that's where our Mishnah and Gemara is leading us. So let's look now at the text. Matnitin, our new Mishnah tells us, Heviu lefanav, they brought before him, in other words, if somebody there at the meal, what did they bring? They brought vegetables. Metabel bechazeret. Okay. Now, the ba here is not into, right? They dip using chazeret. In other words, taking chazeret, which was a kind of vegetable, and they're dipping that into water or vinegar. Right? So that was part of the, in a sense, appetizer at the meal. Ad shemagia parperet hapat. And they did that until they got to the, let's say, parperet hapat, and there's like 3 or 4 different explanations. Parperet in modern Hebrew today refers more to dessert, but that's not the case here. We're talking about, again, another kind of appetizer that was usually maybe implying here that they would dip matzah, or they would dip some sort of other items into that, what was closer to the main course. Okay? Now, then the meal continued. Heviu lefanav matzah, they brought matzah. V'chazeret, and again, chazeret is another kind of vegetable. V'charoset, and they brought the charoset, the mixture, right? And I'm using charoset here specifically to indicate that it was a mixture of fruits, perhaps wine and other things. And remember real quick, the ingredients for Ashkenazic charoset are somewhat different than the ingredients for Sephardic charoset. Sephardic charoset has sometimes dates in it, or it has apricot in it, or it has other kinds of things in it as well. So it's a good bit sweeter, right? In any case, they brought these items, ushne tavshilin, and 2 foodstuffs. Now, the commentary, according to Koren, was that the 2 foodstuffs here were the main course items. Namely, that was a part of the chagiga, the shlamim that was used as the, let's call it for the moment, the main course. And the other part was the Korban Pesach. Right. So those could be that's what is one suggestion. Afal pi she'ein charoset mitzvah. Even though the eating of charoset is not a mitzvah, says Tanakama in this Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Sadok omer mitzvah. Okay, so already we have a machloket where, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Sadok, it is a mitzvah to eat charoset. Why is that important? Remember, we said that heseba, leaning, was required as part of the Seder experience. We referred to that when we saw the fact that whether an important woman had to lean or not, recline or not. So here too, the question would be, for certain things, perhaps you did not need to recline if you say charoset was not a mitzvah. Now, let's go on. Uba mikdash, hayu mevi'in lefanav gufo shel Pesach. Okay? And our Mishnah concluded with the fact that when the Beis HaMikdash was in existence, right, they would actually clearly bring part of the Korban Pesach. Now, Gemara, as we go over to the next Amud, Amar Reish Lakish. Now, Gemara gets a little bit more complicated. Reish Lakish is saying, from this Mishnah, okay, he is going to bring a discussion that we find focused in a number of places in the Gemara. Okay, namely, Zot Omeret, mitzvot tzrichot kavana. This seems to imply that to fulfill the mitzvah, there has to be clear intention. Okay, that's the part of the regarding charoset. Kevan delo be'idin chiyuva demaror hu de'achile. Since we're not using the chazeret at this time, okay, to fulfill the requirement of maror, of bitter herbs, that would be eaten. Okay. Why? Because on chazeret we say the blessing, beborei pri ha'adama, hu de'achile, because we're saying, using that blessing, okay, to indicate when we have that particular vegetable, chazeret. Right? So the Gemara continues now. V'dilma lo ichavein lemaro. Perhaps they didn't intend to use the chazeret to satisfy the requirement of maror. Hilkach ba'e lemahader v'lit bule l'shem maror. Therefore, it's for that reason that then they would have to go back and dip another time for the purpose of maror. De'isal gadatach, because if you're of the opinion, mitzvah lo ba'i kavana, that to fulfill the mitzvah, it does not need intent, lama lach trei tibule. Why then would you say that you would have to dip twice? Okay. So remember, that was, right, one of the questions, right? Shtei pa'amim, right? So the Gemara now comes with a statement. Vaha tavile chada zimna. Because here you've already dipped one time. Mimai. Therefore, what's the reason that we could argue that you have to dip a second time if it's not because we didn't have the initial attempt for maror? Dilma leolam mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana. Perhaps we're arguing instead that mitzvot do not necessarily need proper intent. Udika amart trei tibule lamali. And when you say that in this particular case where we have two dippings, why do we need it? Ki hechi de lahave hekera latinokot. Because this way it becomes a sign, a symbol for the children, act by which they are encouraged then to ask a question, right? V'chi tema. And if you want to say, im kain lishma'inin sha'ar yirakot, but if that's the case, so let's learn that about the other vegetables, right? Why do we say it has to be dafka chazeret? Okay. I ashme'inin sha'ar yirakot. If I was going to learn it and apply it to the other vegetables, hava amina hecha de'ika sha'ar yirakot hu deba'inin tre tibuli. Then I would say that when one has other vegetables available, that's the reason that we need two dippings, one for the other vegetables and one specifically for, right, chazeret to be used as maror. Aval chazeret lechuda. But in regards to chazeret by itself alone, lo bai tre tibuli. Therefore, I would not need two dippings for it only. Kamash malan. Therefore, it comes to teach us da afilu chazeret ba'inan tre tibuli, that even when we only have chazeret, we're still necessary to have two dippings. Ki hechi de lahavi be hekera latinokot. So that here we will have at least some sort of sign or symbol for the children to be able to ask. Va'od, and furthermore, Tanya, it's also taught in another Braita, a following statement: Achlan damai yatsa. If one ate these vegetables and their status was damai, okay? Remember damai being a status that no tithes had been taken from them whatsoever. Yatsa, one still fulfilled the obligation. Achlan below mitkavein. If one happened to eat them without the intent of fulfilling the mitzvah, okay? Yatsa, he still nevertheless satisfied the mitzvah. Achlan lechatzain. If he ate half, in other words, he ate half of one kind of vegetable and ate half of another kind of vegetable, and of course dipped each one, yatsa, he's fulfilled the obligation. Ubilvad shelo yisheh ben achila lechaverta yoter mikadei achilat pras. So long, when we're talking about the halves, that one did not allow the amount of time to extend between eating half and eating the other half, the amount of time to eat half a loaf. Okay. Now the Gemara picks up on this and says, Tana'aihi, but this is a machloket Tana'im. Titania, as was taught in a Braita, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Afal pi shetivel b'chazeret, even though one dipped using the chazeret, mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeret v'charoset u'shnei tavshilin, that our Mishnah taught us, right, that it's still a mitzvah to bring chazeret and charoset and the two cooked foods. So the Gemara asks, va'akati mimai, and still, why is that the case? Dilma kasava Rabbi Yossi, perhaps it's because Rabbi Yossi's of the perspective, of the view, mitzvot, ein srichot kavana, that he does not hold by the idea that mitzvot need clear intent. V'hai deba'in trei tibuli, and here, when he requires that they have to have two dippings, Ki hechi didahave hekera latina code. It's because he believes that there must be some sort of sign for the children to be able to give them to ask. Im kain, asks the Gemara, if that's the case, my mitzvah, then what's the mitzvah involved then in his doing the dipping? My shnei tavshilin. If that's the case also, then what is the purpose of bringing these two cooked foods? Amar Rav Huna. Says Rav Huna, what you want to know is what are the cooked foods and how do they fulfill a mitzvah? Silka va'aroza, says Rav Huna. It's beets and rice. I'm not sure if that would be,
That's fine.
that would be. But
That's one for the Spurgeon.
it fits in with what we saw earlier in the previous Amud about keeping one's meal low key, so to speak. Rava Hava Mahader Asilka Va'aruza. Rava would return, come back, okay, regarding beets and rice. O'il v'nafik mipume the Rav Yehuna. Okay, that he would follow the same practice. Since Rav Huna was his teacher, Rava would follow the same practice of having beets and rice as part of his meal. Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, however, is going to tell us something else. Shma mina, the Rav Huna, lit dechiyesh laha, the Rabbi Yochanan ben Nori. This must imply, says Rav Ashi, that Rav Huna did not suspect or follow the direction, the practice of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The Tanya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri taught a Braita and said as follows, Omer, Orez min daganhu, that according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, rice was a kind of grain. The chayavin al chimutzo karet, and if you kept rice in your home, okay, it would become chametzik, and therefore you would be chayav deoraita karet. Va'adam yotze bo yedei chovato b'Pesach. Not only that, but one could make rice cakes, rice bread, okay, or rice, so to speak, matzah, and use that to fulfill their chiyuv on being yotzei for the holiday. Okay? So that was, and so he's saying Rav Huna did not hold to that opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri.
Good news.
Now, Chizkiah as follows. Maybe the two foodstuffs is something else. Okay? Afilu dag ubeitza sha'alav. Maybe it is egg and fish, and you've cooked the egg on top of the fish. Maybe that was a style then, I don't know. Rav Yosef Amar. Rav Yosef, however, spells that out very clearly. Tzrich shnei minei basar. It must be two varieties of meat. Echad zecher lePesach, one, okay, in remembrance of the Korban Pesach, ve'echad zecher lechagiga, one in remembrance of the Korban Chagiga. Okay? So, in other words, not to eat those exact same items, but in recollection of them. Ravina Amar, says Ravina, Afilu Garma Ubishula. According to Ravina, it could be even the meat on the bone and gravy that accompanies it. Pshita, that seems obvious. Heicha de'ika sha'ar yirakot, where the person may have other vegetables, and therefore using the other vegetables, he can fulfill, for example, dipping and things like that. Mevarech ashar yirakot borei pri ha'adama. He can say on those other vegetables, blessing borei pri ha'adama, va'achil, and eat them, vahadar. And then he goes back and takes something else, mevarech al achilat maror, va'achil, and take something else and use that for the maror as his bitter herbs, and then eat that. Okay? Now, however, says the Gemara, Hecha deleka elechasa, but where it's a situation where all he have is lettuce, okay? And what we're referring to here is primarily what we would call romaine lettuce, especially the stalk, okay? What's the situation? Amar Rav Huna. Says Rav Huna, Mevarech me'ikara amaror, okay? Borei pri ha'adama va'achil, that he would use that initially and as his bitter herbs and say the blessing Borei pri ha'adama and then eat it. Levasof, and afterwards, Mavarech alei al achilat maror va'achil. And then afterwards say the very specific blessing regarding eating maror and then eat that. Now, tomorrow we'll pick up on Chaf Ted Vav, where we see that there may be a challenge to that order, okay, that Rav Huna is suggesting, okay, and some further discussion, okay, of what could be used and what was used, perhaps because of various locations. So we'll stop there today, guys. Okay.
Does that mean they use kitnios at that time?
I'm not sure.
Talking about Oris.
Okay. Well, it was clear that Orez was not considered to be Dagan. It wasn't considered one of the 5 grains. That doesn't necessarily mean,
Right.
but what does Sfardim do?
Yeah.
Sfardim,
Do.
they do eat kitniot.
That's right.
Okay? Another time when I can, I'll tell you a quick story. When I had years ago a Rebbe who was teaching some of this material, who was Sfard, and how he understood why the Ashkenazim made the Isur as opposed to the Sfardim. Okay, whether he's right or not, I don't know, but it made a lot of sense, his explanation. Okay. All right, everybody, take care and stay well. All right.
All the best.
Yeah, everyone have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Stay safe.